coast to coast. Every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
Welcome back. The euphoria of France's win over Croatia in the World Cup is being felt around the world. In New York City, the Empire State Building honored the French national team with red, white and blue at the top of the iconic tower. What's more noticeable, perhaps, about the French national team is the composition, with a team that is more than 75% African, immigrant and/or Muslim. The team highlights the contradictions of a former colonial power being represented on the international stage by the people they once colonized. Arise America's Akisa Amulepu has more on that story.
There's no doubt the French national team is repping Africa. President Kimpembe posted the team's excitement on his Instagram page, documenting their road to a World Cup victory. A kiss for the Coupe du Monde trophy as celebrations continue for the French national team. Kimpembe is of Congolese descent, and it's that connection to Africa and its diaspora that has everyone paying attention. Laurent Dubois is a history professor at Duke University.
The team is actually showing what France actually is, which is a very diverse place, a place in which the histories of colonialism are present all over the place, demographically, historically, and which that history is here, and it's going to continue to be here. And France going forward is a resolutely, a multi sort of ethnic society with lots of people of lots of different backgrounds. So when you see the French team, you're seeing what the country actually is, rather than some fantasies that people might want to have about it. And that's powerful, and it's powerful especially because the team can create a joyous sense about that, a positive sense about that, not a kind of fearful or xenophobic sense about it, but say, look, here we are, and isn't this great? We're winning the championship, we're together in the streets. So it's just a counterpoint to the sort of divisive and fear-mongering that you get all the time. Is it strong enough to overcome those forces? Certainly not without, actual political and structural change. But it certainly feels great to have it, and it's important to have that alternative, I think. At the very least, it can allow you to imagine political alternatives and then maybe give you some energy to pursue those alternatives.
It's that representation that has everyone paying attention. It's inspired Africans and its diaspora to identify with the French national team.
I think there is a sense that the players on the French team see themselves very much as kind of members of a kind of black diaspora, if you want to put it that way. I mean, the way that the music that they're kind of promoting, the connections they have, almost all of them actually to African countries. I mean, the vast majority of people on that team have, family backgrounds that connect to Africa. Some were born in Africa, most were born in France, but they have those connections. And I think people in the countries where they're from, see those as real connections. So there's a contradiction and an irony to this. It's that, this country that was a former colonizer, the national team becomes kind of a symbol of, in some ways, of the oppressed. That's, I think, the result of the players themselves kind of connecting that way. And people see, the celebrations, the kind of connections between these players. And I think people are looking for something like that. They're looking for a good energy, for a positive energy on a team. And I think people have found that in France. In an earlier generation in the 1990s, that was already true because among the European teams, France was always actually one of the more diverse in terms of the background of players. That has become more common among European teams since 1998. But in 1998, when France won the World Cup for the first time, it was actually quite unusual for European teams to be as diverse as France was. Holland had some Surinese players. The first black player to play for England was in 1979, whereas they had played much earlier for France. Still the case that Italy and Spain and a bunch of other countries have very few, if any, black players. So France does stand out within Europe, again, because of this team where really the majority of the team actually has this kind of African background. So that's a striking thing, and I think it's people are noticing, and it's shaping how they relate to the team.
Dubois is the author of The Language of the Game: How to Understand Soccer. The book is an exploration of soccer and its global impact. He describes soccer as a universal form of culture.
Well, I wanted to write a book that would essentially kind of welcome people into the culture of soccer, for those who are already maybe watching but wanted to deepen their understanding, or for people who aren't that familiar with the sport. The book is dedicated to all those who love soccer and those who don't but love someone who does. So part of it is that for those people who are surrounded by soccer, as many people are in the world, but maybe needed to kind of get into it more or understand more about it. So I do explain in a lot of core things about the game, the history of the game. I work through the different positions on the field, goalie, defender, midfielder, forward. I look at the referee, I look at the fans, I look at the and the managers. So that's the structure of the book. But then through that, it's also kind of an invitation to understand why soccer functions as this kind of incredible language, and to sort of see all of the sort of sides of this sport, which I kind of argue are the reasons why it has become basically the most universal form of culture we have. So it's also just an exploration of the form of the sport and why it has essentially, come to play the role that it has in the world.
That universality has propelled soccer and its players to unparalleled fame at a young age. France's Kylian Mbappe is just 19 years old. Under the leadership of team coach Didier Deschamps, the French national team has managed to capture the imagination of the world in spite of playing on professional teams throughout the year. Deschamps has managed to bring cohesion to a national team of players who are used to competing with each other on opposing professional teams.
I mean, it's complicated because obviously players play in professional teams a lot more than they play on their international teams. They largely are on their professional teams. I mean, the other day when Pogba and Fellaini were covering each other during the Belgium-France game, at the end of the game, they kind of embraced because they're on the same team. They play each other together all the time, and here they were playing against each other. So when you bring players together for a national team, the question is, do you have the infrastructure and the good coaching to turn them into a unit, right? These are players who have to be kind of turned into a unit over a relatively short amount of time. I mean, they play obviously qualifying games, but so I think the coaching on both of those teams is really great. There's a mix of kind of more mature players and some really younger players. There's kind of leadership on the field and off the field. There's a lot of it is about the psychology, I think, about being able to kind of hold it together. If you think about it, this is probably one of the most high-pressure situations certainly I can imagine. I mean, there are a few others, but just imagine the kind of pressure of being on that. And often, we're talking about people who are pretty young, 19, 20, 22 often. So if there isn't a kind of some kind of strength on the pitch, and during a soccer game, that really has to come from within the team more than from the coach. I mean, the manager can help at halftime and before, but when something is going wrong, it is the kind of connection and maturity of the players that's really going to make the difference.
Dubois notes that while the strength and diversity of the team is a source of inspiration, it won't address institutionalized racism in France.
It's obviously the case that, having a diverse soccer team is not going to upend white supremacist ideas or kind of racism or the institutional exclusion of people. I mean, in many ways, the fact that there are so many athletes from underrepresented group is itself a symptom of racism, right? It's precisely the effects of racism that mean that to some extent people pursue athletics because they don't have other options. And so all these things are related, right? But at the same time, symbolically, what soccer does in a way that I think it's sort of hard some ways for people in the U.S. at least to get a sense of this is that when you send a team to the World Cup, they become probably the most prominent symbol of your country that you'll ever see, and certainly the most beloved symbol of your country that you'll ever see.
And it's that symbol that will have people throughout the world cheering Les Bleus until the next World Cup. For Arise America, I'm Akisa Omulapu.
And you're watching Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.